So I think Dan will give people maybe till about 2 after, 3 after to hop on, and then we'll get started.
Sounds good.
You are welcome to start your slides. Should have access.
Awesome. All right. How's it going, everybody? I couldn't hear anybody talk, but welcome. Come on in. Welcome. Come on in, guys. We'll get started here in just a minute.
Dan, I think we'll give you 1 more minute. Looks like we've got a couple extra people trying to log on, and then we'll get started.
Sounds good. I'll straighten out my eyebrows and get ready.
All right. I think we're good. We're at about 2 after. So let's get started. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for coming. I am Molly Thompson. I'm the Industry Partnerships Program Manager with the Maine State Workforce Board. And I'm hosting today's session, but I'm not your presenter. Before we get started, just a couple orders of business. We are recording this training, and we will make a copy of it available. It will go on the new WorkSource Maine website when it launches later this year. That will not actually be available probably until October. So if you need the recording before then, just let me know by email, and I'll drop my email into chat in a moment. You can reach out and I'll provide a copy if you need it. We have also allowed you to use your video and sound for this webinar, which is a lot of webinars don't do that. We're doing that because we'll have a question and answer time at the end. Please make sure you're muted now, but you can raise your hand or post in the Q&A section or in chat if you have questions during the presentation, or you can hold your questions till the end. And I will respond to things in chat. So if you don't want to talk, you can put them there, and then I will raise my hand and ask Dan the questions. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Dan Greiner. Dan is the Director of Design, Innovation, and Strategy for the College of Engineering at the University of Colorado, Denver. He has about 8 other titles as well, but we'll leave it at that one for today. He oversees several entrepreneurial programs at CU as well, including the Smart Futures Lab and Outside Lab. And I'm looking, I think a few of you were at his presentation earlier this year. on needs assessment. Today, we're going to be focused on scoping projects, and he does a fair bit of that. Prior to his current role, Dan spent over 30 years in entrepreneurship and product development roles. He's founded 4 companies and 2 nonprofits. He's worked for a variety of product services and initiatives across a range of industries, many of which overlap with high-need industries in the state of Maine, which is why we have chosen him for today. He also held leadership roles in Fortune 500 companies and higher education institutions around the world. So we're very lucky to have him today. Dan, thank you for being with us today. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Molly. And if only I could, live up to the esteem and introduction of our colleagues or friends, right? If only we could be as good as what people think about us. So thank you, Molly, for that. And I will preface this whole presentation about scoping your project with, I was not classically trained in order to do project scoping or project management. It became a thing that I had to do as a result of running my own companies or working within institutions. And I would assume that there's probably a smattering of that same sort of challenge here within the Zoom room, right? Where you aren't probably a project manager. You're probably a person who is tasked with wearing that hat on a smaller team. So with that in mind, I have taken other classes and courses and tried to up my skill when it comes to this, in realizing that there are levels of expertise beyond where I was at. So in that same vein, I will kind of provide a broad overview of scoping because I think it's going to mean different things to each of you and where you sit within your organizations, the types of projects that you're taking on, whether they're individual products, whether they are programs, services, whatever it happens to be. I tried to take the large and broad view of what that looks like and come up with instead some principles that might be applied across all those different types of projects. So I do recognize a couple of you. Thank you for attending this. I must have not offended you in the first round, so thanks for sticking with me for the second. I do feel like there is a through line. So in our first session, we talked a lot about finding needs and identifying needs. That is really the precursor to scoping your project, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So we'll start, and feel free to interrupt, ask questions throughout. I know Molly said that we would do a Q&A at the end, and we will, but if there's something that maybe it's not quite clear, or it needs to be a little bit more elucidated for you, please feel free to ask a question. You're probably not alone in that confusion. So with that said, I'll get started. So as I mentioned in our previous thing, we talked about understanding need. So when you have a scope of a project, usually the first thing that hits me is, do I know enough? Where do I need to get more information? And that comes into kind of 4 key areas that I'll talk about. But first, you've probably seen this this sign in a local service station or in some sort of service-related company, usually a print shop or a mechanic shop or something. And while it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, there is some truth to it. You're not going to be able to get good and cheap and fast, or fast and good and cheap, or those 3 things are not something that are able to be achievable. So there's an underlying kind of principle here of understanding what your variables are in your project and understanding what compromises or things need to be kind of concrete within your project versus things that can be shifted or moved. So, there are going to be trade-offs and variables in your project, and understanding what they are going to be really important. So one of the first things, as I mentioned, the problem. Have you really identified the problem that you're trying to solve? How have you outlined the metrics for success of what that solution or problem is going to be addressing? If not, if you haven't done that, you need to go and get some more information. You need to conduct some participatory research, identify stakeholders, identify their needs. You're going to need to find maybe where the problem originated. You might just be dealing with a symptom of a bigger disease. And you may not be able to fix that disease, but it's important for you to know where it started. And then where does your solution lie on that spectrum? And then creating some sort of project requirements document, a PRD, a software requirements document, a marketing requirements document, or a business case. So any of these documents is going to help provide more clarity and really outline the metrics for success for that project. Another variable, the time. How long do you have before you can implement this solution? What is that time scale that you have? And what is your timeline for the implementation? It's testing, like what period is it going to be tested over? How long do you have to refine that thing? And then also, what's the timeline for the review? If you don't know the time, this can be one of the killers of any project. So establish deadlines for that project. Even if it's not on fire, establishing deadlines helps set those flags, helps create those milestones that people are working towards and ensure that it's going to fit into or get onto the agenda. All solutions also have an expiration date. So, I bought a really nice coffee maker and I love it, but I know that someday it's not going to work. And when do I need to think about buying another one? When do I need to identify what kind of maintenance or other things need to happen in order to keep your solution working? And then when will it be, when do you need to review that? With the pace of technology these days and the way that things are changing in the workforce, it becomes so important to set those milestones for reviewing processes, because what we're seeing in a lot of times, I work with a lot of governments in my role in the Smart Futures Lab, where we're creating smart city technologies. A standard procurement process might take 18 months from the time that you've identified what the problem is, all the way to procurement and implementation. In 18 months, a lot of technology can become obsolete, or processes can become obsolete. So have you prepared and understand that in your process, and are you planning for it? That will be very, very important. The team, who's going to do the work? Who's going to execute this? Who's going to maybe even oversee the solutions implementation? Will the solution be done by an internal team, right? Or will they be creating it? And if not, what about that external partner or solution provider? Do you already have them in mind? Are they in your network? Is that a group that you're already engaging with? Not sure? Well, from your problem framing that you should have done on the beginning of this, or that you need to do, you should really identify those stakeholders, both internal and external, in order to move that project forward. If your solution already exists and it's something you can go out and buy, then identifying the characteristics of what it needs to do in that PRD or SRD, one of those documents, will help you to really down select those options. Hey, this checks off most of our boxes, or we think that this is going to be a great first step. If your product doesn't exist, then who in your network, who in your team could help develop this, and identify what is that minimum kind of viable product or prototype that we could try to create and then test and come up with a new solution around. I saw something come up in the chat. Is there a question or a comment? Nothing so far? Okay, good. Can't see it most of the time, so I just wanted to make sure.
Now there is. Sorry,
now
Dan.
there is? Oh yeah, okay, go ahead.
Can you clarify PRD and SRD?
Yes, I'm actually going to go into a little bit more specificity around those in just a minute. So we'll talk specifically about that one, and please add some more questions. Oh, is there any more? Okay. So, and then lastly, budget. So another big killer to projects. Can you afford to buy the solution, right? Do you have a way to purchase this outright, right? Is it already in your budget? If not, there are ways to maybe justify or find the money within a budget to prove out this part of it. So, do you have money to run the entire project? Like, or can it be phased? Can it be broken up into chunks that then could be, after we finish this part, then we will take on this next part, and we'll justify the cost through success of that first effort. Is this project offsetting costs in areas? Does it have a transitional nature to implementation, right? Is it a slow burn until this thing is fully running and seeing the value, right? Is it an amortized approach where you have an initial cost and then that slowly is paid out or costed to a budget? Is the solution subscription based? Is it something that'll be an ongoing cost? Is it a one-time purchase that you just make and you don't necessarily have to buy another one? How is it going to be maintained? How is it part of a larger system that needs consideration, right? So, I'm working on a project right now with the airport, the Denver International Airport, and they want to take on snow removal robots to replace some of the trucks and stuff that's out there. And I said, well, unless it's a one-to-one exchange, right? This unit can do the job of a truck. That's great, but now where is it going to be stored? How does it operate in the cold? Does it have the same duty cycle? Can it run as long as a fully fueled diesel? What happens when there's an emergency? What is the cost over time for replacement of batteries? Do they last as long as a diesel engine, right? All these kinds of things, they all come out to a financial component as well. So thinking through some of those challenges on the front end helps to really identify what a good solution is. Well, you're not sure about the budget. Usually this is one of the ones that people are more sure about, but in this case, like I said, you might have to justify this in your budget. So identify how the solution will either increase costs, save costs, or change the way budgets are spent. Are you trying to save? These are kind of the four areas that a project that can cross across on money, right? Is it saving? Do you need to save money? Do you need to save time? Do you need to save pain or some discomfort? Or do you need to save effort? And all of those can be traced back to kind of a financial component. So how much money are you trying to save or cut from your overall budget? How much time are you needing to save within your team, which can usually be drawn back to wages? And what is solving of that pain worth, right? For me, there's times when I will pay for something because it's a convenience. And there's other times where I'm like, I'm not gonna pay for that, right? I feel that way with DoorDash, I have to say. It's like, I can drive 5 miles and I'm not gonna pay $30 for DoorDash to deliver this to my house, right? It's just a personal pain that I will endure because of the cost, right? So there is a threshold for that pain where it's worth spending the money. Sometimes it's not worth spending the money. So, and then how much effort, right, is being saved, and what is the financial benefit you might be able to trace that back to? Those can all help to prove out the value of spending money from your budget. Next part. So maybe you could say, I know all these things, right? I know all the things. I've got all these things down. I hope you do, and that'd be amazing. Usually there's some gray areas here, but maybe you know all those things. So let's get started. Let's start scoping. We talked about a PRD, product requirements document. There's a different version of that for almost any type of system. And you can make up your own, but they have some very simple kind of frameworks that you can use. A software requirement specification also. These are really kind of what are the jobs to be done for your product? What are the jobs to be done for this software? What is the marketing requirement, right? How will this thing need to act within a market in order to be valuable? And we're a business case. How will this business perform? So those are all kind of 4 versions of the same thing. A PRD is kind of broken down into like these 9 basic categories. It can be more specific. If you work on an FDA project, well, at least FDA from a few months ago, the projects were very different, but you had a very long regulatory path. They would go over your PRD in extreme depth, and you usually even hired a person to oversee the FDA management of that regulatory compliance and how you were meeting up against all these different requirements in that document. So outlining what is that project information you tried to create? What's the detailed objectives and goals? What are your assumptions? You want to record those. No, don't put them down as fact. Put them as assumptions that can then be, justified or challenged. Did a question come through? Oh, okay.
I shared a link.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Adding some sort of background to this. What is the background data that you're reacting to or making decisions based on? What is the strategic fit maybe into an overall, roadmap over the course of a year or against a strategic plan? Listing what is the scope, right? And what are the stakeholder interviews and user stories that you've identified that help to identify what the requirements are? What are those features of your product? The release criteria. So this is like, when do you release that beta? When do you release that initial version that you feel like it's good enough to now, be used and tried? And then what are success metrics that you would want to measure against? And then exclusions. You want to catalog what jobs it's not going to do, what challenges it's not going to address. Those are going to be, and sometimes more important than the things it's supposed to do, because it may not be worth the effort to take on, or you might need to make it clear to leadership and to teams that is not the job of this product or this service. So software requirements document has some of those things as well. It's a little bit different flavor because obviously software can play a much different role. But product scope, value, audience, intended use, definitions, acronyms, table of contents, because now you're almost creating a document, like a software can be almost like a document. You're going to be thinking about the audience and how it's taking it in, how they'll be using it. What's the data handling? Is it collecting data? How is that being managed? These are all things you'll want to think through. What kind of regulatory considerations need to be taken into the process? Are you collecting money or providing legal, documents or information through this process? And then how is that being done in an equitable way? So all those things need to kind of be part of the thinking. You may not have, some of these things are going to be, you don't know enough yet, but these are the information you want to start to fill in. Does that help to give a little bit better understanding of that PRD? Feel free to speak up. Okay. All right. 2 thumbs up. That's high praise. So when you're scoping these projects, there are many different paths that you can take in order to kind of create frameworks or timelines for these projects. And those, there's a lot of different processes that you can bring that into. Regardless of which one you choose, there are some kind of principles that you can use in any of those paths. So first and foremost, I think, and whenever you're working within a team, which most of you, I would assume, are, it's going to be important for you to work collaboratively on this process. Even if you're a subject matter expert, you've maybe come up with the most of the document, you know most of the things you need to know. More than yourself is going to have to work on it or feel like they are part of this process and buy into it. And while you might be working, while you might be able to create this document completely on your own, it's going to be beneficial for you to kind of connect with someone else and get their feedback, get their additional kind of buy-in to this process. So sharing the information that you provided, right? What are your requirements? What's the timeline? Maybe what's the budget, right? From that, you should be able to break the project down into chunks, identify what can be phased, what can be, what are steps, what are sprints that might be able to be executed against. Understanding what are the dependencies, the interdependencies between each of those steps. Are these things that need to run in a linear fashion? Can you work in parallel with multiple teams working on the same thing or on different parts of the same thing? At each phase, you're going to, or step, you're going to really want to get your contributors to talk about the amount of work that is associated with each of those steps, to be able to kind of quantify, and you're forcing them to verbalize their thinking about this project. And that's an important step, even if it's not for you, it's for them. Not just for you, I should say, it's for them. They have to think of themselves in this project, think of their effort and their work within this project and how that would be executed. That really builds that confidence, builds that shared understanding of what you're going to be undertaking. It builds their confidence as well. So, and then at the end, or throughout this process, you're going to be cataloging concerns, cataloging things that are not going to be achieved, or maybe you don't have the bandwidth or the team to execute against. You're going to want to identify those. And you're only going to be able to see the holes when you have more people speaking to it. So with these projects, I mentioned different paths for kind of project management or setting these things up. You're going to want to think through, okay, is this a linear process? Is it a parallel process? Is it cyclical? Can it continually iterate and churn out different pieces? Waterfall process. We've all seen Gantt charts. We've all seen these Excel spreadsheets where, there's the months and there's the project and the work, and it's just spread out in this very stair-step approach. There are many projects that can only work this way. I think of like in construction, you can't build the roof and when the land's not cleared, you need to build out these things in a very specific way. And each part of the process is dependent upon the one before it and will lead to the one after it. So understanding what kind of project and what kind of framework it might need is important. If your project can be worked in parallel or it's cyclical, there are other systems that you might be able to engage. Agile, which I know many people are familiar with, and it's a very kind of famous one right now. Agile is very useful in like software development, where you might have lots of parts of a code or a program that can be created in parallel with some key connection points, right? So there are dependencies, but you've identified those at the front end, and then you're able to work in parallel or in cyclical patterns where this group was working on this piece, now they're working on this piece, right? And those are great systems, but it has to fit your project. Not the other way around. Don't try to just take your project and fit it into these systems. You need to use a little reasoning there to figure out which ones make sense for you. So if you've identified some of these things already, what you should have at this point, you should understand what kind of framework you're packing this into, right? Is it a linear one, parallel, cyclical? Is it a hybrid of all these things? You should understand the amount of time. What is the time scale you can work within? That can lead to a budget, right? If you understand how many people are going to be associated with something, the time that takes, and what's the framework is going to be, then you can start to turn that into scopes of work. And then who will do what, right? If you're engaging an outside team, you might have an estimate from them of what it would take to do this work. You might understand what is the hourly rate and wage burden across a project over this amount of time to take it on. You should have broken this down into some chunks, right? Some phases or some steps. At each of these steps, you should have some deliverables, some things that are going to be the result of each of these steps. And you should also know what's missing. So this isn't finished, right? We're not done with our scope of work here. This is just giving us a broad overview that has a couple, well, these three kind of main areas, right? Timeline, budget, and who will do the work. From this, you should be able to get some feedback. Maybe it's from leadership, maybe it's from yourself and you're judging this thing, or it's maybe from an outside client who's looking at this. And at this stage, you can get that feedback. What you want to avoid in some of these is a binary decision, a yes or no, right? You want to think through how can we get to yes? And a better way to do that is to work in collaboration with expectation. So here's where I'm at so far from what I know. Is this right? Right? Am I on the right track? Where do I need to shift? Right? Getting that kind of feedback can help reduce that binary approach where it's like, yes, no, maybe later. Those things are always really frustrating to a team, especially if they've gone through the work of creating this work so far. So figure out a way to get to yes. So after that, you get that feedback. You're getting this information from that leadership, from that client, or yourself. You've identified that this is the right way to go. Refine it. You're going to need to maybe shift the timeline, maybe shift the budget, maybe understand who you're going to need hire, or what parts of a team are going to be responsible for executing this project. Each implication, much like that sign at the beginning of those fast, cheap, and good, right? Can't have all three. When you're making these kind of decisions and you're moving these levers in different ways, if it needs to move faster, you might have to work in parallel, right? You have to find areas where multiple teams can engage at the same time with a larger team, which is larger cost burden as well. If it needs to be cheap, you might need to cut down your scope and think through what is the really minimal job that we can do with this project to prove out its value with the least amount of money or the smallest amount of team, right? And if the work needs to be outsourced, you don't have the expertise within your team to do this, then you're going to be beholden to their timeline, and you're going to be beholden to what they're willing to charge for it. So you kind of give up some of your autonomy in that process. From these different, this feedback and the information you've gathered, you really should be able to come up with a well-defined scope, structured and scheduled proposal. But there are some other considerations as well. So pitfalls, through the effort. If you have really identified and set up your project well, these things may not be as big of a challenge. However, I've never been in a project where we did not experience scope creep. And that's normal, right? That shows a good process. If people blindly followed a process to its eventual end and did not come up with ideas or have any kind of input along the way, I would be that's a different kind of unhealthy. But scope creep is where your project has expanded or shifted from your original intention. That might be the right path, right? You might need to shift or change your project. However, resist the urge to just adopt those things without a rescope. At least take the minimal amount of effort that you took to scope it to begin with to now rescope this change. It will have implications to your timeline, your budget, and the team that's going to be associated with it. So make sure that those changes are remember my example of, Sometimes your DoorDash, right? So sometimes it's the save time or whatever may not be worth the effort. So, or the budget. So think through whether this is really going to be a good solution or not just a new shiny object that people are wanting to run to. Make sure you understand the implications of adopting that change. Delays. There has never been a project I've been on also where there weren't some sort of delays. If you've built out your project with some extra breathing room, then great. You're going to allow yourself to have some of those mistakes or have some of those challenges, and you'll be able to have that breathing room. If not, you want to think through on the front end, what are areas where we could reduce the backlog? What are areas where we might be able to work in parallel? Or we might be able to task a team to help with one portion to make that part move faster in order to address some of these challenges. So think through those things. And then also you're going to want to report this out. You're going to want to talk about it early. I think in times when I've been in leadership, you don't want to hear about problems when you notice them. You want to hear about them when they happen, and then how they're going to be addressed. And if you're able to have a good relationship and rapport with your leadership or the client, then you need to talk early and often about these challenges. And this really, project managers, good project managers, are needed at this moment. They're needed when problems happen. If a project could just run as intended, great. We wouldn't need project managers. However, there's always going to be some of these challenges, and this is where you show your value. There is lots of help out there. There's a lot of processes and things you might be able to use. There's a lot of software, from simple things like Excel and kind of waterfalling out a Gantt chart. That's a very easy way to start this process. If you're doing this a lot, if you're doing a lot of project management, a lot of project scoping, you might want to, you use some more advanced tool sets, or maybe your projects are very complicated and complex. There are different types of systems that are out there that you can purchase, that you can learn, and really streamline that process. Project development systems. There's a lot of training out there that you can get in a variety of different processes. A lot of them have Japanese names because, surprise, surprise, the Japanese are really great at organizing systems and working through, creating these kind of processes. So if you're doing stuff more like continuous improvement, you might want to think about Kaizen or Lean. You've all heard of Six Sigma, and that's a little bit more of a management process, but it also involves elements of these things. If you're trying to create something altogether new, Agile is kind of it's a manifesto, but within that is many different tools that could be useful, like Kanban or Scrum. And the titles actually say nothing to what they do, but they are all frameworks. They're all tools that you can use that may fit the needs of your team or not. And you need to decide, as the person who's kind of the ringleader here, the ringmaster, you have to decide what kind of tools are going to be useful to your team. If they are too limiting, too rigid, too foreign to the way that you're working, then this could stifle the creativity and the flow of the work that's coming out of those teams. So consider either creating your own process, using the best of many of these different things that really fits your need, or consider adopting one with the team, getting them all together and saying, hey, I'd like to introduce this tool. What do you guys think? How about we revisit this in a month after we've been using it, right? You create these kind of opportunities for people to get that buy-in and try things. But then iterate. Know that no project is going to fit perfectly into these boxes. So be willing to shift and change on that.
Dan?
Go ahead.
No, you can finish. I was going to say, when you're done through with these slides, can you give us an example of one of the projects that you've run? Just a snippet of one. I think all of this is great, but I think it will help people to sort of see, here was the product we were aiming for, and here's the process, high level of what we went through.
Sure, sure. I can certainly do that.
You can
Yeah.
finish the slides.
Yeah,
right?
lastly, I think this is actually the last slide, so perfect timing. Project management in the end, right, when we're talking about scoping a project, it is really starting to delve into that project management space. And really, this is people management, which comes down to setting expectations. So you've all heard of under promising and over delivering, right? In this case, you have to really think through what is the thing that I really need to nail, and making sure your budget, your time, and your team can achieve that thing. If you have more time to do more things, you have more time to address or create new features after you've met that minimum, then you are going to create that kind of under promising and over delivering scenario. Maybe you're able to do that in one portion of the project early on that allows you to then gain confidence with your client, gain confidence with your leadership, to get more autonomy and to move through this project well. So think through really what is the minimum. Don't try to pack everything into a scope and say, well, maybe we won't need it. That's not how scopes work. Really identify what are those things you will definitely achieve with that budget, time, and team. And then lastly, communicating regularly. I cannot stress this enough. Being able to identify where a project is going wrong early allows you to then shift or add more people to that team, or get feedback from a leadership perspective that allows you to make changes. Your team's morale and dedication to your project, your client's confidence, the degree of freedom you have in the project, not being micromanaged, the autonomy that you're afforded, the project stature and viewpoint from outside. So a lot of times you'll hear of a project going over budget or taking too long. People's viewpoint of that project and its success might be damaged by the way that you have taken on these projects. So communication early and often is necessary. You've probably all been in a restaurant at some point, or you notice a lot of my metaphors or examples are food related, but I'm a food collector. So I would say, I've experienced this where something was not right about my meal, right? Maybe it was the wrong dish, or something was overcooked, or whatever. The way the person reacts to that and how they address those challenges can overshadow the rest of the meal. Maybe your meal was great. It was okay, no problem. But then they over delivered in addressing a challenge. That experience then leaps to a different level, right? You've now been bought into the amazingness of this restaurant just because of the way that someone has addressed the challenge that you've experienced. So handling a challenge well can actually be a better experience than just a smooth project. So think through how you're going to be able to do that in these things. So any questions before I give maybe an example? Nada?
I was wondering, giving an example is great. But do you have any examples of like free project management software that might be like sort of the most useful, especially if you're a novice at doing this sort of using it?
There's a lot of software out there. I mean, I've used Monday, I've used Avaza, I've used a variety of them. They all have their own kind of flavors, and a lot of them are freemium, right? None of them are actually completely free. So you'll hit kind of a paywall at some point, whether it's the amount of users you have that are using that software, or maybe you've got more than one project. Yeah, Monday's great. So you're going to have to decide which one's going to fit kind of where you're at, and do a little research to kind of figure that out. If it's a project you're doing that has a product versus software versus, some of these are really built for specific use cases or areas. And I would try to look at those and think through whether it fits your management style, the type of projects that you're running and things like that. But those are two that I've used. Avaza is great for being able to trace things back to a number, right? So if you say, I've got this team engaged here, I've got this team engaged here, I've got this team engaged here. Each of those people on that team carry an hourly rate, and then I'm able to extrapolate that into a budget at the end or a proposal that has numbers to it. The thinking about what the project has to do and all that can't be really offloaded to a software. You've got to do that homework yourself, unfortunately. But those things help to organize it.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. I know some of them are definitely more user-friendly than others. And it usually depends on the team,
Yeah.
for sure. So, 'cause some can just be visually overwhelming.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And sometimes the ramp up to getting to be a good user of those products is so big, it's not really worth the effort, right? It's like, yes, this thing can do everything, but now I've got to learn how to do everything through this process, right? I used to use Basecamp way back in the day, and that was a great way to kind of have all the team working in one space. And I use that one a lot. But yeah, I've used Monday as well, and it only is as good as the implementation and the team that you're trying to connect it to. So
Thanks.
yeah, you're welcome. Any other questions? So I will actually use an example that I'm working on literally yesterday. So I am scoping out a 8-month project with the Denver International Airport, and I mentioned this one element. So the project is very broad, and they want a roadmap of all implementations of technology across their entire enterprise, right? So they want to know how to implement automation, how to implement autonomous vehicles, and how to implement robotics across the entire airport. So that's a big, hairy mess, right? To try to think through. But I've done similar projects in other ways. So for me, my first thought was, okay, let's sit down with the operations team and let's sit down with the innovations team. Let's find out what information they already have, right? Understand this problem from their standpoint. Do they have a systems map of how their entire project works, their whole system works? Do they have that systems level understanding? That could greatly inform what we're doing, right? Unfortunately, they don't have that. So I don't have the team to execute this project, right? My team that I have is already engaged on other projects and scopes of work, and they're not going to have the bandwidth. So what professionals can I engage at what rate for the next 8 months in order to take on this work? So I'm trying to understand what is the work that needs to happen. So I do that by sitting down with them. I ran multiple workshops, I ran 2 4-hour workshops with them around what is the things that they're trying to achieve here. And then turn that into a proposal. So I came up with a rough proposal that would identify key deliverables that came up in that meeting, the timeline, and I phased it into different parts. So I don't think I'm violating anything by showing this. Let me see here.
While you pull that up, Dan, just a funny side comment. I dropped into chat while you were talking, a case study about Denver International Airport's failed automatic baggage claim system when it opened. And I lived in Colorado at the time that happened. It's widely used as an example of how not to run a collaborative project.
Yeah, they're really trying to make some changes and things, but so this is I think 17 or 18 page document at this point. But these meetings are with 10 to 20 people, right? They can be pretty big and heavy, and not everybody has a touch point, but everybody has an opinion. So, trying to understand where one part of the project starts and where another part begins. Taking information from the meeting and making sure that they're heard and that it's showing up in the proposal was important. Looking at their topics of interest, right? Talking through them as a partner and how they operate, kind of their pillars of what is important to them. Those are all going to be elements of how we achieve or how we work through the project. So making sure they feel heard in that process and that we are representing their views and opinions in this process. And then understanding the landscape of these projects. What are some of the human elements? So that this is a union shop. So how will we approach these groups that we need to get information from? How will we kind of preface this process with them? Data utilization and speaking on the front end about how that will be achieved, and what that data where it will go, and then what are project goals and outcomes? Like, what are those things that we will actually deliver against? So this is kind of the deliverables, right? And innovation, I guess maybe this is probably really small for you guys. It's pretty small for me, so. We'll have an innovation runway report, digital format. So being specific about what we're trying to deliver. A primary challenge area, right, to pilot projects within this space. A systems map of airport operation, departments and verticals identified for review, right? So that systems level understanding, and then understanding what are those leverage points in that system that we need to work within. Any kind of process flows or product system specifications that we can approach. So Molly mentioned the baggage claim. So understanding how a bag gets from the parking lot to the plane and vice versa, right? Doing customer journey maps and understanding, like, what is that process? What are the touch points with people? What are the touch points with machines? And then is there ways to completely do an end run around all those things, right? Are there better ways for us to get that bag to the plane that don't involve the current processes, right? So all those are kind of elements that we'll be delivering against. The process flow. So I give an example of one particular area, and I mentioned snow management. So outlining snow removal, ice prevention, staging, fuel, supply storage, capabilities. How does this bisect with staff? What are the different zones and multimodal approaches to snow removal and snow mitigation? What are challenges with timing, delays, reduced throughput? Like, what kind of challenges are they experiencing because of snow right now? In turn, understanding who are those internal SMEs that can provide another layer of information beyond what we see. What teams are going to be responsible for making this solution a success or failure, right? If you don't engage with those folks and get them on board, this project and its pilot is going to be unfairly judged on its success. So how can you connect with them and identify ways to work with them easily? Doing an internal workshop with those teams, the vendors, and trying to think through, if we're going to pilot these technologies, here's what we want to understand your concerns. We want to talk through what are the best ways to achieve this. And then the highlighted portions are the piloting part of the process. So engaging in procurement, creating an advisory board that would look at these and decide which are the best types of implementations that we wanted to approach. Creating a pilot, then starting that pilot, testing and monitoring that success through the process. What are those metrics that we're going to be measuring? Reviewing those outcomes with those internal teams, and then finally recommending for scale, right? So we're doing a lot of these things in a microcosm or in a small stage, that then we have to understand what it means to scale it for a broader use. So those are some of the things. We give a little more information about our team. And then when we talked about phasing, so I kind of broke it into these 3 areas. Immerse, so engaging with stakeholders to identify and understand opportunities and needs. Interpret, define those needs and map them. And then finally illuminate. What are those clear areas for opportunity? So what I'm scoping here really is a research effort to create a roadmap. We're calling it a runway for the airport in this process. And I broke it down into phases and how each of those phases will be executed. What are the key things that will happen in that? And then what months are associated with it? Like, what is that timeline? And this is very high level in a way, but you can see we get into quite a bit of detail in this process. So I hope that gives a little bit of an overview. And this one's a little sticky. It's a little challenging. Hopefully your projects are smaller or less complicated than this one, but it gives you an idea of how you have to kind of break these things down. Does that help, Molly?
I think that was great. We're talking about workforce development mostly in the state, and a lot of the people on this call are engaged in that. So it's very sticky and it's very complicated. And yeah, it's messy. So having a messy example, I think, is a good thing.
Okay, good.
I appreciated that. The one thing I didn't hear you say that I would love for you to answer, if that's okay, is how much do you engage the limits of funding when you are in the design process? Because a lot of what we're doing, we may have specific requirements from a funder. For example, I'm setting a budget and the money that I have on deck right now cannot be used to pay stipends for someone to take a training. Do I need to engage that in the design process, or is that something I iterate on after I have my ideal, right? That's the concept. If
So
and when, how do we engage those limits?
Yeah, so you would want to kind of identify those challenges in, wherever you're starting out, right? Keeping those in mind, because you don't want to have to like it's almost like growing a plant, planting a plant where you want it to grow versus trying to transplant it or cut it into a more convenient shape or something, right? You want to try to let those things grow in a way that is positive and grows more organically around those challenges. So yeah, you want to identify what are those key problems. Is your money the color money kind of challenge, right? Where it's this money cannot be used for these types of things, right? So those things all box in your project and they can seem super limiting, but once you know those limits, then you can actually come up with solutions from within it, right? You don't want those to be enforced after you've come up with the perfect plan, and now you've got to come in and hack it apart in order to address those. So for the airport, I was very lucky that they wanted to start from meeting the need and then work backwards into a budget. Actually, in that process, we found out that there is an upper limit to the budget. And now I've got to kind of work backwards from that, right? So if you have a budget you're working from, it's helpful, right? Because you can really set expectations clearly. If you try to come up with the perfect project and then you have a budget enforced upon you, that can really can challenge that. So if you have a number already, you can start to think like, well, if I've got $100,000, I can only engage 2 people over, half time over the course of a year, right? You're not going to be able to do massive amounts of change with that. Or maybe it's a small measurable thing that you're trying to achieve, right? So I would really take all those things into consideration on the front end of your process. And that helps to right size your effort, right size your solution.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question if anyone has one.
This is probably more of a comment than a question, but somewhere in the process, I've learned that you have to have periodic check-ins to see if the emperor does in fact have clothes on. Because I've seen projects get so caught up in like a jargon or cool visuals, whatever thing, but the people involved have lost sight of what it is they're actually doing. And some of this stuff doesn't make sense, but nobody wants to be the first one to speak up to say, hey, what do these what do these words mean? There's just a lot of sage nodding and hopefully somebody else on the team understands what's going on. And I'm
Yeah.
interested about, building in checkpoints where it's strongly encouraged to say, does this sound like alphabet soup? Does this still make sense? Do we all understand what's going on? Or,
Mhm.
somebody, I think just people need to be empowered to call out if something's gone off into the cow field, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. If you're able to phase out your project or create these kind of planned stopping points or planned pauses in that process, it gives you a chance to review that. Like in Scrum process, they have like a weekly review, right? Or they usually do like these 2-week sprints where you're kind of reviewing, what's been done over the past 2 weeks. You're right, though. If people have their head down and they're just, let's go through all the work tickets, let's just pound these out. And there's no check-in about what the overall goal is or what's been learned, then yeah, you're going to have this moment of clarity. Hopefully sooner than later, where you're like, we were all plotting towards this thing, but it was a kind of a mirage, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I mean with scope creep. So scope creep can be a good thing in that, it helps you to refocus around what you've learned in that process. And if you've set up your project to have those pause points, those phases, those steps, whatever it happens to be, and you've established a good communication style within your team, then you can get that feedback. If you haven't, and you've got this very, ham-handed approach of like, just get the work done, then yeah, you're probably going to get stuck at some point. And as the person managing that project, it's going to be on you at that stage to not have addressed or seen those things coming. Yeah, totally agree. And I've certainly been in those projects before where it's like, I don't think what we're doing is what we thought we were doing. Yeah. Are you sure? Are you still sure this is what you want? Yeah.
Are we still talking about an airport here?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Folks, we are at time, and I want to be respectful of everybody's schedules today. I dropped Dan's LinkedIn into chat at the very beginning. So if you want to connect with him later, you can. Again, this has been recorded and it will be available for you later if you would like to watch it again. And Dan will actually be coming here to Maine in September to run a 2-day in-person training where you will bring your own project needs, and he and his team will help us collectively work through those using a design thinking framework. If you are interested in attending that, please email me right away to reserve a spot. We only have 40 spots and they're going to fill up very, very fast. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Dan, for being here with us. We're very grateful.
Thank
And
you, guys.
I look forward to seeing you all in a few weeks for some grant writing workshops.
Ooh, there we go.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you all very much.
All right, guys. Good luck. Take care.